Before we dive in, grab something to snack on because this story is going to have you on the edge of your seat. Drop a comment below if you've ever trusted the wrong person. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss these kinds of stories. The automatic doors of Cresthaven Medical Center in Portland, Oregon slammed open. Duck Hywin did not walk in. He stormed in 6'2" of controlled chaos wrapped in a blood-stained dress shirt. His jaw locked so tight the muscles in his neck looked like cables about to snap. In his arms, Iris Wallace, his wife 7 months pregnant, was barely holding on. Her dark brown skin had gone ashy. Her braids were matted against her face. One hand was pressed weakly against her side where the bleeding had started 30 minutes ago and still hadn't stopped. Nobody in that lobby moved fast enough for him. "Somebody better get a gurney right now," Duck barked, his voice cutting through the noise of the waiting room like a blade. People scattered. A toddler somewhere started crying. 2 nurses at the front desk jolted out of their chairs like they'd been electrocuted. Good. They should move. Because if something happened to Iris, if something happened to that baby, Duck Hywin would burn this entire building to ash and call it a Tuesday. He pressed Iris closer to his chest, tilting his chin down to look at her face. Her eyes were half open. Her lips were moving barely. "Still here," she whispered, probably trying to reassure him, probably knowing him well enough to understand that he was seconds away from losing it. "Don't talk," he said. "Quieter now, just for her. Save it." A gurney appeared. 2 orderlies. Then a nurse with a clipboard who looked like she was about to ask him to fill out paperwork and genuinely reconsidered when she saw his face. "Sir, we need to." "She's 7 months?" Duck cut in, laying Iris down with a precision that didn't match his frantic energy. "She collapsed in the car. She's been bleeding. That baby is not dying in this hospital tonight. Do you understand me?" The nurse nodded quickly and grabbed the gurney rail. The orderlies started wheeling. Duck walked beside it, one hand hovering near Iris. Not quite touching, like he was afraid he might break her if he did. His eyes swept the hallway, cataloging everything. Exits, staff, security cameras. Old habit. He couldn't help it. Even here, even now, his brain was running calculations. What he was not calculating for, what blindsided him so completely that his legs actually stuttered mid-step, was the woman who appeared at the end of that hallway. She was tall, Korean-American, olive skin, hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore a white coat with the kind of straight-backed confidence that told you she owned every room she walked into. Her eyes scanned the incoming gurney with clinical precision, then landed on Duck. And she smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a worried smile. A slow smile. The kind that knows something. Duck's entire body went cold. Dr. Mila Windsor. Of all the hospitals. Of all the doctors. Of all the possible nights. She was here. He hadn't seen her in 14 months. He'd moved across the state. Changed numbers. Thought. Genuinely believed. That chapter was closed. Locked. Buried under everything he'd built with Iris. The marriage. The baby coming. The version of himself he was still trying to become. But there she was. Walking toward the gurney. Toward his wife. "I'll be taking this case," Mila said to the nurse, her voice smooth and completely professional. "Dr. Halliday is in surgery. I'm the attending on call." The nurse nodded. Of course she did. Mila Windsor had 3 plaques in the hallway and a reputation that made residents nervous. Duck grabbed the gurney rail. Hard. No. One word. Flat. Absolute. Mila looked at him, only at him, for exactly 1 second. Her expression didn't crack. "Mr. Hywin," she said, perfectly calm. "Your wife needs immediate attention. If you'd like to discuss attending preferences, I'd invite you to do that after we stabilize her." Which was the right thing to say. Which was the logical thing to say. Which was exactly the kind of thing that made it almost impossible to argue without looking like a man losing his mind in an emergency room. Which maybe he was. Iris reached up. Her fingers found his wrist. Weak grip. Still there. "Duck." Her voice was a thread. "Let them help me." He looked down at her. Her eyes were clearer now, just barely. Enough to be reading his face. Enough to be confused by what she saw there. She didn't know. She couldn't know. He'd made sure of that. But now Mila Windsor was bending over his wife with a stethoscope, and Duck Hewen, a man who had faced down rival organizations with nothing but a calm face and cold hands, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Genuine, choking fear. Not for himself. For Iris. For the baby he hadn't known he wanted until the moment Iris had shown him the test with shaking hands, and he'd had to sit down on the bathroom floor because his knees stopped working. He let go of the rail. Because Iris had asked him to. Because he couldn't cause a scene in this hallway. Not here, not now, not with Iris watching. But he didn't move. He stood right there, arms folded, watching every single thing Mila did with the focus of a man who still wasn't sure he'd made the right call. Mila didn't look at him again. She was all business, checking vitals, asking the nurse questions, calling out orders with authority. Professional. Competent. Exactly the kind of doctor you'd want. Except Duck knew her. Really knew her. Knew the thing behind the professionalism. The obsession she'd dressed up as love. The calls that got more frequent, then stopped. The silence that never quite felt like peace. Iris was wheeled through a set of double doors. Duck tried to follow. Family waiting area is down the hall, a nurse said, stepping neatly into his path. He looked at her. She did not step aside, but she did look slightly like she regretted her career choices. Sir, we'll update you as soon as we have information. It's hospital policy. Policy. Great. Duck unclenched his jaw, turned, and walked to the waiting area. He didn't sit. He stood by the window with his hands behind his back, looking out at the Portland skyline doing its usual rainy, gray thing, and he thought about every decision that had brought him to this exact moment. The organization, the choices, the years of keeping things in separate boxes, his work in one, his life in another, Mila in a box he should have thrown into the ocean a long time ago. He'd convinced himself he was protecting Iris by keeping his past compartmentalized, by never letting those worlds touch. But the boxes were touching now. In a hospital, at 7 months pregnant, in the hands of a woman whose slow smile had told him, without a single word, that she knew exactly where she was and exactly what she was doing. Duck pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. He walked to the corner, found 2 bars, and made a call. It rang 3 times. I need background on Cresthaven Medical Center, he said, the moment it picked up. Specifically who's on the on-call attending roster for tonight. And I need it fast. He hung up, stared at the floor. Down the hallway, behind those double doors, Iris was somewhere. Bleeding. Scared. Trusting the hospital to keep her safe. Trusting a woman who had just looked at Duck Hewen with 14 months of unsaid things sitting behind her eyes. Iris always said she could read a room. Said she could feel things before she understood them. Said Duck carried his secrets in his shoulders, that they went stiff when something was wrong. She'd probably noticed his shoulders the moment she saw his face change in that hallway. She'd probably filed it away to ask him about later. There might not be a later if he didn't figure out how to get Iris a different doctor. But first, he needed to know Iris was okay. He needed a heartbeat and a number and someone to tell him the baby was still there. Everything else after that. He sat down. Finally. Not because he was calm, because his legs were making the decision for him. The waiting room had a TV on in the corner showing a weather report. A woman across from him was knitting. A man in scrubs was sleeping upright in a chair. Normal. Ordinary. Every terrible minute ticking by. Duck Hewen, who had never begged for anything in his life, sat in a plastic chair in Portland, Oregon, and silently begged for his wife to be okay. Behind those double doors, Dr. Mila Windsor stood over Iris Wallace's chart and let the smile return. Just for a second. Just where no one could see it. Then she picked up her pen and started writing. If you're just joining this story, go back and watch from the beginning. You do not want to miss what happened in that hallway. And if you're already caught up, buckle in. Because this scene, this is where everything breaks open. The monitoring room attached to room 114 was small. Quiet. The kind of quiet that feels intentional. Iris Wallace lay on the hospital bed with her eyes at half-mast. Not fully gone, not fully present. The sedative they'd given her for the pain had pulled her under just enough that the room kept going in and out of focus. She could feel the pressure of the fetal monitor strapped across her stomach. Could hear the steady beep of the machine beside her. Could see the ceiling tiles if she concentrated hard enough. But she couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't do much of anything except float in that strange in-between space where your body is resting but your mind keeps reaching for the surface. She was aware. That was the thing nobody in that room accounted for. Not completely, but enough. Mila Windsor moved around the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She checked the 4-line. She reviewed the chart. She spoke to the attending nurse, a young woman named Deb, in low, measured tones that sounded perfectly reasonable. "We'll need to administer the secondary medication through the drip," Mila said, not looking up from the chart. "Given the complications with the placental positioning." Deb nodded, pulling up the medication log on the tablet. "Do you want me to document that as a precautionary measure?" "Standard procedure," Mila said. "Smooth. Easy." But here was the thing. Iris had been in and out of prenatal appointments for 7 months. She knew what standard procedure sounded like. She'd asked enough questions that her actual OB, Dr. Rhonda Fales back in Seattle, used to joke that Iris should have gone to medical school. What Mila had just described was not standard. Iris couldn't explain it, couldn't name the medication, couldn't cite the protocol, but something in the back of her floating, half-conscious mind raised a flag so red it was practically on fire. She tried to move her fingers. They twitched, just barely. Mila's back was to her. Deb was pulling up the medication screen. Iris tried to speak. What came out was barely a sound. More like air moving through her throat than an actual word. Neither woman turned around. She tried again. Nothing useful. The 4-bag above her head shifted slightly as Deb made an adjustment. Iris stared at it. Focused on it the way you focus on something when everything else is trying to drag you under. The door to room 114 opened, and Duck Hewen walked in. He wasn't supposed to be there. Iris knew that, family waiting area, hospital policy, everything the nurse had said. But Duck had apparently decided that hospital policy was a suggestion that applied to other people, because here he was, filling the doorway in his blood-stained shirt with his jaw set and his eyes moving across the room in that fast, calculating way that meant he was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. His eyes went to Mila first, then to the 4 setup, then to Deb's hands. He stopped. "What medication?" he said. Not a question. A demand wearing a question's clothing. Mila turned around, perfectly composed. "Mr. Hewen, this area is restricted. I'm going to need you to..." "What? Medication?" He said each word separately, the way you do when you want someone to understand that you are not moving until you get an answer. Deb looked between them, opened her mouth, closed it. Mila set down the chart. She folded her hands in front of her. Calm, practiced, the posture of someone who had prepared for exactly this interruption. "We're administering a medication to manage the risk of premature labor given the bleeding episode. It's completely..." "Show me the chart." "Sir, I am not obligated to." "Show me the chart." The monitor beside Iris beeped steadily. Deb took one small step backward, the tablet pressed against her chest. Mila looked at Duck for a long moment. That look calculating, measuring, deciding how much room she had. Then she smiled. That same slow smile from the hallway. "You're scared," she said, quietly, almost gently, which made it worse. "That's new. I've never seen you scared before, Duck." The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Deb's head turned sharply toward Mila. "You know him?" Deb asked. Mila didn't answer her. She kept her eyes on Duck. 14 months of silence and you show up here. With her. Something moved behind her eyes. Fast. Then gone. "Did you think I just disappeared? Did you think I just stopped?" "Mila." His voice was low. Warning. "I waited," she said. Still quiet. Still steady. But the smoothness was cracking now, just at the edges like ice in early spring. "I changed my entire career path to follow a lead I heard you mention once. Once, about a hospital in Portland. I have been here, Duck. I have been waiting for you to remember that I exist. That's enough. And then you walk in carrying her." She stopped herself. pressed her lips together. Reset. When she spoke again, her voice was back under control, but it cost her something visible to get it there. You chose her. Fine. But I am not going to stand in this room and pretend that I don't have options. Duck crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed the 4-line. Not yanking it out, but holding it. Stopping anything from going through. Nobody is touching my wife's 4 until I have a different doctor in this room, he said. Low. Absolute. Call your chief of staff. Call whoever you need to call. But you are done in here. Mila looked at his hand on the 4-line. Something shifted in her face. Something that might have been, under different circumstances, hurt. But it had gone rotten. Turned into something harder. You should have answered my calls, she said. I should have done a lot of things, Duck said. Starting with never meeting you. The words hit. Even Deb flinched a little. Mila straightened, smoothed her coat, picked up the chart and set it on the counter with a precise, controlled click. I'll have the charge nurse reassign the case, she said. Like nothing had happened. Like they were talking about a scheduling conflict. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. She seems like a lovely woman, Mila said without turning around. I hope she has a safe delivery. She left. The door swung shut behind her. Deb stood very still for a moment, then put the tablet down on the counter and said, quietly, mostly to herself, I need to report this to the charge nurse. Do that, Duck said. He was already at Iris's side, his hand finding hers on the bed, his eyes moving over her face checking for, he didn't know what, signs, damage, something he could actually fix. Iris's hand was warm. Her chest was rising and falling steadily. The monitor kept beeping. The room was quiet. Duck pulled the chair beside the bed and sat down. Really sat down this time, not the tense, perching sit from the waiting room, but the kind that meant he wasn't going anywhere. He pressed Iris's hand between both of his and stared at the floor. He didn't notice, couldn't have known, that the sedative's pull had eased in the last few minutes. That the room coming back into focus had happened slowly, the way dawn comes. That Iris Wallace, lying perfectly still with her eyes closed and her breathing even, had heard every single word of that conversation. Every word about the calls, the 14 months, the career path followed across the state. The options Mila had almost used on a woman she didn't know and a baby she only saw as an obstacle. Iris heard all of it. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't let her breathing change. She just lay there, still as furniture, still as a secret, while something inside her rearranged itself into a shape that was quieter and sharper and much, much more dangerous than the woman who had been carried through those emergency doors an hour ago. She filed every word away, every pause, everything said and unsaid, and when Duck squeezed her hand and said, very quietly, too quietly, the way people talk when they think no one can hear them, I'm so sorry, Iris. I'm so sorry I let this get anywhere near you. She let him think she was sleeping, because she needed time to think first, time to plan, time to understand the full shape of what she was dealing with before she decided what to do with it. The baby kicked once, strong, clear, decisive, like punctuation, like a reminder, like the only cosign she needed. Drop a comment if Iris just became your favorite character, because she is not playing. If Iris Wallace was just a name to you before this story, she won't be after this scene. Comment she if she does what I think she's about to do. And hit that subscribe button because we post every week and you cannot miss what's coming. 3 days. That was how long Iris stayed in that hospital bed without saying a single word about what she'd heard. 3 days of Duck bringing her soup she didn't ask for. 3 days of him sitting in that chair like a man doing penance, watching her sleep, watching her eat, watching the monitor like if he stared long enough he could will everything back to normal. 3 days of nurses she didn't recognize. Reassigned ones, new ones, anybody but Mila ones. Checking her vitals with the kind of careful politeness that meant word had gotten around. Iris let him hover. Let the nurses come and go. Let the room stay quiet. She was not resting. She was building. Because here was the thing about Iris Wallace that most people didn't know. That Duck, even after 3 years of marriage, had maybe only half understood. She was not a woman who fell apart. She was a woman who went still. Dangerously, purposefully still. The way a city goes quiet right before a storm makes landfall and the birds all disappear at once. Her mother, Claudette Wallace of Birmingham, Alabama, used to say, "Baby, the most powerful thing a woman can do is make you think she's not paying attention." Iris had been paying attention her whole life. She'd paid attention when she was the only black woman in her graduate cohort at Claremont. When advisors talked around her in meetings. When people assumed the seat she'd earned was given to her. She'd learned early that the loudest response is not always the strongest one. So, 3 days of quiet. 3 days of letting Duck think the worst of what she was dealing with was physical recovery and pregnancy hormones. Then, on the morning of day 4, she asked the charge nurse for a specific thing. "I need the name of the hospital's patient advocacy officer," she said, calm, clear, like she was asking for extra pillows. The nurse blinked. "Of course, I can get you that information. And I need the direct line for the Oregon Medical Board's complaint division." Longer blink. "And," Iris added, adjusting the pillow behind her back, "if you could bring me a notepad and a pen, I'd appreciate it." She was discharged 2 days later with a healthy baby still in place, a blood pressure back in normal range, and a list in her handwriting that was 2 pages long. Duck drove her home to their house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood of Portland. Big craftsman, quiet street, the kind of place that looked like it had no idea who actually lived there. He kept glancing at her from the driver's seat, kept almost saying something, kept stopping himself. Iris looked out the window the whole ride. She was cataloging, going back through everything she knew. Every prenatal appointment where the notes had been slightly off, every phone call Mila's office had made to her personal cell instead of going through Duck's medical proxy the way they should have. Every moment she'd dismissed as coincidence because you don't walk through life assuming your doctor is your husband's hidden anything. Probably she'd missed signs because she wasn't looking for them. But still, they were there. The car pulled into the driveway. Duck turned off the engine. Didn't move. "Iris," he started. "I know," she said. 2 words. Quiet. No drama. He went completely still beside her. The kind of still that means a person's brain has just kicked out every other process to focus on one thing. "How much?" he said carefully. "Do you know?" She turned to look at him then. Really look at him, the full-on direct eye contact she'd been avoiding for 5 days because she needed to have her plan in place before she had this conversation. Before she let him see that she knew. "I heard everything," she said. "In the room. I was awake." Duck looked like he'd been hit somewhere internal. His jaw tightened. His hands, still on the steering wheel, pressed down hard. "Iris, I'm not doing this in the car," she said. Simply, "Come inside." She got out. He followed. Inside, she sat at the kitchen table. He sat across from her. Between them, nothing but wood and the particular silence of a house that knows something important is happening. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She told him exactly what she'd heard, point by point, the way you present evidence, which, in a way, was exactly what she was doing. When she finished, Duck didn't make excuses. She'd half expected expected the version of him that ran organizations and moved pieces on a board to try and manage this too. But he didn't. He sat there and took every word of it and looked, for maybe the first time since she'd known him, genuinely small. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Right now." She folded her hands on the table. "Nothing. I need you to stay out of what I'm about to do." He looked up. "This part," Iris said, "is mine." She started with the Oregon Medical Board. The complaint she filed was detailed, documented, and devastating in its precision. She'd requested her own medical records the day before discharge. Her right, fully legal, non-negotiable. She'd gone through them line by line with a highlighter and found 3 places where Mila's notes didn't match standard prenatal emergency protocol. 1 medication listed that hadn't been administered because Duck had stopped it. But it was listed, pre-written, ready. The board investigator she spoke to, a woman named Patricia Jones who had the energy of someone who had seen everything and was still somehow surprised by people, listened to Iris's account without interrupting once. When Iris finished, Patricia said, "You understand this process takes time." "I understand," Iris said. "I also have a witness." The nurse who was in the room, Deb Fontaine. She heard the conversation between Dr. Windsor and my husband. She already submitted an internal report. I'd like to make sure your office has a copy. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, Mrs. Wallace, I'll be honest with you. Cases like this are difficult to prove. I know, Iris said. That's why I'm not stopping at the medical board. She wasn't. Mila Windsor had a reputation in Portland's medical community that she'd built carefully over 6 years. Speaking engagements. A research paper co-authored with a physician at OHSU. A profile in a Pacific Northwest healthcare journal with a photo of her looking thoughtful and competent. Iris read all of it. Every word. And then she made calls. Not loud calls. Not, I'm going to destroy you calls. Quiet, precise calls to people she knew. Because Iris Wallace, before she was anyone's wife, had a master's degree in health policy from Claremont and had spent 4 years working for a healthcare advocacy nonprofit in Seattle. She knew this world. She knew who talked to whom. She knew which conversations, if started in the right rooms, spread like water through cracks. She called a former colleague named Soren Vale, who now worked as a healthcare ethics consultant for 3 hospital systems in the Pacific Northwest. She called a journalist named Tanya Dupree at the Portland Tribune who covered medical accountability and had won an award for it. She didn't ask either of them to do anything specific. She just told them what happened. Accurately, calmly, with documentation. She let the information do what information does when you put it in the right hands. Meanwhile, Mila Windsor was still walking the halls of Cresthaven Medical Center. She'd been moved off obstetrics pending an internal review, hospital policy after an incident report, but she was still there, still seeing patients in other departments, still smiling that smooth smile in the corridors, still probably thinking she'd survived it. Iris found this out through Deb Fontaine, who had texted her, unprompted, which said something about what kind of woman Deb was, to let her know. Iris texted back, "Thank you. Keep documenting anything unusual." Then she got dressed, drove to Cresthaven, and asked to speak with the chief medical officer. She didn't have an appointment. She got one anyway. Dr. Everett Chun, CMO of Cresthaven, 62 years old, the kind of man who had survived hospital politics long enough to recognize a serious situation when it walked into his office, listened to Iris for 22 minutes without looking at his phone once. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Windsor is currently under internal review," he said carefully. "I know," Iris said. "I'm not here to tell you about the review. I'm here to tell you that the review is not enough." She opened the folder she'd brought and slid 3 pages across his desk. "These are the protocol deviations I identified in my medical records. I've highlighted them. I've also included a comparison to the standard of care documentation published by the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists." She tapped the 3rd page. "This one is particularly interesting." Dr. Chun looked at the pages. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. The specific shift of a man who is realizing the conversation he thought he was walking into is not the conversation he's actually in. "Mrs. Wallace," he said slowly, "where did you study?" "Health policy," she said. "Claremont Graduate University. But I've spent the last 5 days reading obstetric emergency protocols specifically. I'm a fast reader." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the pages. "I'll be escalating this internally," he said. "I assumed you would," Iris said, gathering her folder. "The medical board has a copy of everything I just gave you. So does a journalist at the Tribune. So does a healthcare ethics consultant currently under contract with 2 of Cresthaven's partner institutions." She stood up, smoothed her jacket over her stomach. Still rounded, still very much present. "I'm not trying to burn your hospital down, Dr. Chun. I'm trying to make sure my daughter and I are the last people Mila Windsor ever has the chance to hurt." She shook his hand. She left. Took 11 days. 11 days from the night Duck carried Iris through those emergency doors to the morning Mila Windsor's hospital badge stopped working. Suspended pending a full investigation. Privileges revoked. The internal report, combined with Deb's statement, Iris's documentation, and a quiet phone call that Soren Vale apparently made to someone on the hospital's ethics board, had created a case that Cresthaven's legal team apparently decided was not worth defending. Iris found out from Deb again. Another text. This one just said, "She's gone." Iris read it, set her phone face down on the kitchen counter, looked out the window at the backyard. The one duck had been slowly trying to turn into a garden because Iris had mentioned once, casually, that she liked hydrangeas. He'd planted 6 of them in October. They hadn't bloomed yet. Maybe. But still. She put her hand on her stomach. The baby moved, that same strong, decisive kick from the hospital room. "I know," Iris said out loud, to no one, to both of them, to the room. "I know." 3 weeks later, Mila Windsor sat in a coffee shop in the Pearl district of Portland with her laptop open and her phone lighting up with notifications she wasn't reading anymore. The Tribune article had run. Tanya Dupree had written it carefully. No names of patients, as Iris had requested. Just the pattern. The investigation. The questions about oversight in obstetric emergency care. Mila's name was in it once, in a context that was accurate and devastating and impossible to argue with because every single thing in it was documented. Her research paper had been flagged for review by the journal that published it. 2 speaking engagements had quietly unbooked her. A hospital in Tacoma that had been considering her for a department head position had stopped returning emails. She sat in the coffee shop and stared at her screen and probably tried to work out where exactly it had gone wrong. The answer was the hallway. The moment she'd looked at Duck Hewen and smiled like she was holding cards. She'd been so sure of what she had. So sure that the woman on that gurney was a variable she could control. She had not accounted for who Iris Wallice actually was. That was the thing about underestimating someone. You only find out you've done it after they've already finished. Mila closed her laptop. Outside the coffee shop window, Portland went about its ordinary business in the rain. Comment, she ate and left no crumbs. If Iris just became everything to you. Say, the hydrangeas Duck planted bloomed in March. 6 of them. Purple and white and crowded together along the back fence like they'd always been there. Like they hadn't spent the whole winter doing absolutely nothing visible above the soil while everything underneath was quietly becoming something. Iris noticed them on a Tuesday morning, standing at the kitchen window with a mug of decaf she wasn't really tasting. She stood there for a long moment. Then she went back to the table and sat down and didn't say anything about them to Duck, who was making eggs at the stove with the focused energy of a man who had decided that being useful and small, daily ways was the only currency he currently had available. He'd been doing that for weeks. Cooking, driving her to appointments, assembling furniture for the nursery at 11 at night because the instructions were confusing and he refused to ask for help but also refused to get it wrong. Showing up, consistently, quietly, in ways that didn't ask for recognition. Iris watched all of it, filed all of it, said very little. She was not being cruel. She was being careful. There is a difference, and she understood it precisely. The baby came on the 14th of March. Not at Cresthaven. Iris had transferred her care to a practice in the Selwood neighborhood of Portland, a midwife-led clinic called Cornerstone, where her new OB was a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Amara Solis who had gone through Iris's entire file before their first appointment and had not, once, made Iris feel like a problem to be managed. The labor was long. 14 hours. Duck stayed the entire time. Not in the hall, not in the waiting area. In the room, in the chair beside her. Not hovering but present. Which was the thing Iris had needed from him for a long time and was only now getting. At 4:47 in the morning, their daughter arrived. Small. Loud. Absolutely certain she belonged there. Duck held her first because Iris told him to, and watching his face in that moment was the kind of thing that rearranged something in Iris's chest. He held that baby like she was the most important thing that had ever been placed in his hands. Which she was. Which he clearly knew. He didn't cry. But his jaw did that thing, the cable-tight thing, and his eyes went very bright and he stood very still for a very long time. "Hi," he said to her. Just that. Quiet. Cracked at the edges. The baby squinted at him like she was already forming an opinion. Iris watched them and thought, not for the first time, that the thing about Duck Hewen was that he was capable of more than the life he'd built. That somewhere inside the man who ran organizations and kept secrets in separate boxes was a person who could stand in a hospital room at 5 in the morning and be completely, unguardedly real. She just needed to know if that person was going to stay. They named her Soleil, French for sun. Iris's choice. Duck had agreed immediately, not the agreeing of a man who didn't care, but the agreeing of a man who heard the word and understood why it was right. The first 2 weeks home were the particular chaos of a newborn. No sleep, rotating shifts, a learning curve that made every other hard thing in Iris's life feel manageable by comparison. Duck handled the 2 a.m. shifts without being asked. He learned to swaddle with military precision. He researched things on his phone at odd hours and occasionally appeared in the nursery doorway to report findings nobody had requested. Apparently white noise is more effective than music for sleep cycles, he said one night at 3 a.m., holding Soleil against his chest with the calm of a man who had been surprised to discover he was good at this. Duck, Iris said from the feeding chair. Yeah. Go to sleep. He looked at Soleil, looked at Iris. I'm not tired. You've been awake for 22 hours. I'm fine. She looked at him, the specific look that meant she was deciding whether this argument was worth the energy. She decided it wasn't, but she filed the moment anyway. The way he stood there, the way he held their daughter like he was still not entirely sure he deserved to. The conversation happened on a Sunday. Soleil was 3 weeks old. Asleep in the nursery for what they'd learned was a reliable 90-minute window. The house was quiet in the particular way it gets when a sleeping newborn is the only reason both parents are voluntarily staying still. Duck found Iris on the back porch. She was in the cushioned chair, bare feet up on the railing, looking at the hydrangeas. He came out and stood beside the door, not sitting, which meant he'd made a decision to have this conversation and was giving her the option to not have it right now. She didn't send him back inside. He sat in the other chair. They looked at the garden for a moment. I need to say something, he said. I know, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not stalling, she didn't think. Organizing. Duck Hyun had always been precise with language when it mattered. He didn't speak until he knew what he meant. Mila and I, he started, then stopped. Restarted. It ended before you and I, before anything with us was serious. I want you to know that. But I also know that me telling you it's over doesn't fix the fact that I kept it from you. That I knew who she was the second I saw her in that hallway and I still. He pressed his lips together. I still let it go the way it went. For too long. Because I didn't want to explain it. Iris turned her head to look at him. Why didn't you want to explain it? She said. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. Because this was the part she turned over the most in those hospital days. Not the what, but the why. The thing underneath the decision. Duck looked at his hands. Because explaining it meant admitting I'd made choices that didn't fit the version of myself I was trying to be with you. He paused. I thought I could just leave that part behind. Not deal with it. Let the distance handle it. But distance doesn't handle things, Iris said. It just delays them. Yeah, he said. I know that now. She looked back at the hydrangeas. He waited. Here's what I need you to understand, she said after a moment. I'm not angry about the past. The relationship, whatever it was, that's not what broke something. She chose her next words carefully, the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. What broke something was that I was in a hospital bed, bleeding with our daughter, and the person responsible for protecting me was someone you knew was dangerous. And you almost didn't act fast enough. The words landed. She watched them land. Watched his jaw do the cable thing. I know, he said. Low. Rough. I need to know that that never happens again, Iris said. Not just the secrecy. The prioritizing the story you're telling about yourself over the actual safety of your family. She met his eyes. I need to know that if it comes down to your comfort or our safety, there is no competition. Duck looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something she hadn't expected. I should have told you about her the moment we got serious, he said. Not because you had a right to my past, but because keeping it from you was a decision I made for you, without asking. And that's not how I want to be with you. He stopped, started again. I've spent my whole life deciding things unilaterally because that was the job. That was the role. And I brought that into our marriage without realizing it, and it nearly... He stopped again. His voice had gone somewhere unsteady, and he was clearly recalibrating. It nearly cost me both of you. Iris held that. The hydrangeas moved slightly in the early spring wind. I know you went to the hospital, Duck said. I know you went to the board, to the CMO, to the journalist. I know you did all of that while you were still recovering. She hadn't told him the details. He clearly found them anyway. She wasn't surprised. I didn't do it for you, she said simply. I did it for Soleil. And for whoever else Mila Windsor might have stood over with a pre-written medication order and a slow smile. I know, he said. That's who you are. He said it the way you say something you've understood for a long time but are only just finding the words for. You've always been that person. I kept putting you in situations where you had to be that person alone. Iris looked at him. He wasn't asking to be forgiven in that moment. She noticed that. He wasn't packaging the conversation as an apology that needed a response. He was just saying the truth out loud, sitting with it, letting it exist without trying to fix it into something more comfortable. That, more than anything else he'd done in the past weeks, more than the eggs and the nursery furniture and the 2 a.m. shifts, was what moved something in her. Not all the way, but enough. I'm not leaving, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going anywhere. She paused. But things are different now. I am different now. She glanced at him. Are you okay with that? Different how? He said. I'm not going to be the person who doesn't ask questions, she said. I'm not going to assume that the boxes in your life that are closed for good reasons. I'm going to need access, real access, to who you are and what you're dealing with. Not all of it. I understand your world has things I don't want the details of. She was very clear-eyed about this. But the things that can come near us, near her, I need to know about those. Before they show up in a hospital hallway. Duck nodded. Once. Slow. Okay, he said. Not fine. Not whatever you need. Just, okay. The okay of a man who meant it. One more thing, Iris said. Yeah. She turned to look at him fully, the direct look, the complete one. You are good at this. The father thing. The showing up thing. Don't do it because you're guilty. Do it because you mean it. The moment it starts coming from guilt instead of choice, I'll know. And I'll tell you. Duck looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face. Not the cable-tight thing, not the careful calculation thing. Something more like being seen in a way that's uncomfortable and necessary at the same time. Okay, he said again, softer this time. From inside the house, through the baby monitor clipped to Iris's hoodie pocket, Soleil made a sound. Not crying, just announcing. The particular sound of a person who has decided that 90 minutes was sufficient sleep and now required an audience. They both heard it. Duck stood up first. I'll get her. Iris watched him go back inside, through the glass door, down the hall, into the nursery where she could see, through the window, the light come on warm and yellow. She stayed on the porch another minute. The hydrangeas were purple and white and crowded together, and they had spent the whole winter becoming something quietly. And now here they were. Proof that things could survive the cold and still show up in the spring. Maybe. Probably. But still. She got up. Went inside. Mila Windsor left Portland 4 months later. Took a position at a small private practice in a different state. Not obstetrics, not hospital-based. The kind of quiet professional retreat that happens when a reputation has been documented thoroughly enough that the larger institutions aren't returning calls. Iris knew because Soren Vale texted her once to say the ethics case had concluded. She read the message, set her phone down, picked up Soleil, who was doing the serious, focused thing she did when she was trying to understand a ceiling fan. Come on, Iris said. Your dad planted hydrangeas. She carried her daughter out to the backyard, into the March afternoon, and stood in front of the 6 purple and white blooms while Soleil stared at them with the concentration of someone encountering color for the first time. Duck came out a few minutes later, stood beside them. Nobody said anything. The 3 of them just stood there in the quiet of the backyard, which was maybe enough, probably more than enough. but still it was theirs. And Iris Wallice had decided, with the same precision she brought to medical records and board complaints and conversations that needed to be had, that theirs was worth keeping. On her terms. That was the only way it was ever going to work. So that was the way it was going to be. And honestly, if you made it all the way to the end of the story, you already know Iris didn't just survive. She restructured. Drop a comment telling me who you think was the strongest character in this whole story. And if this kind of storytelling hits different for you, subscribe right now because we have more coming and you do not want to be the person who finds out about it late.